The first gunshot ripped through the cold Montana morning like a lightning strike, echoing across the silent stretch of pine grove forest. 6-year-old Lily Carter stopped dead in her tracks, her small frame bundled in a puffy red jacket, frozen as a second shot rang out. Ahead, beyond a row of pines, 3 men in camouflage trudged through the snow, rifles raised, eyes locked on the steel enclosure just beyond the ridge. Before we begin, quick question. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. Let's connect the world through this story. Kid, back away, one of them barked, panic in his voice. That thing's not safe. But Lily didn't move. She did the one thing no one could have expected, she ran toward it. Toward the black mass pacing behind the chain-link fence. Toward the creature 4 times her size with amber eyes that gleamed like molten gold in the morning light. Toward Shadow. Her mother, Dr. Rachel Carter, watched in horror from the trail below, her voice caught in her throat. Lily, no. But Lily was already there, standing between the men and the massive beast behind the fence. She raised a single hand, not with fear, but certainty. Shadow stopped pacing. His ears twitched. Then he sat. You can't hurt him, Lily said, her voice stronger than her size should allow. He's mine. The men stared, dumbfounded. The girl and the wolfdog locked eyes, the air seeming to still, time holding its breath. That moment, the split second where child and creature understood each other without a word, would later be described in courtrooms, on talk shows, and in scientific journals. But back then, it was just a scared mother, a stunned group of hunters, and a girl with a secret, and a mark. They said Lily had never been like other kids. From the moment she was born, Rachel had sensed something different in her daughter. She didn't cry much, didn't babble, didn't respond to smiles or lullabies. At first, Rachel blamed herself. She was a single mom now. Mark, her husband and Lily's father, had passed away in a logging accident before Lily turned 2. Raising a child alone while running a small-town veterinary clinic was hard enough. Raising one with a diagnosis of severe autism spectrum disorder was something else entirely. Lily rarely spoke. She avoided touch. But strangest of all was the birthmark, a faint but unmistakable outline of a wolf paw etched on her left wrist. Doctors called it a congenital nevus. Rachel called it a mystery. Desperate to help her daughter connect with the world, Rachel tried everything: therapy dogs, playgroups, even music therapy. Nothing worked, until she met Frank Weston. His husky sanctuary sat on the edge of nowhere, a few miles past the state highway, hidden by trees and thyme. The man himself was wiry, weathered, with ice-blue eyes that seemed to look straight through you. "I've got one left," he said that day, walking them past a dozen enclosures. "He's different." He led them to a small pen where a black pup sat quietly, watching, not barking, not pacing, just watching. The moment Lily saw him, something changed. She walked forward, unaided, unprompted, and placed her tiny hand against the wire. The pup stood and padded over. He pressed his nose to the spot where her palm met the fence. Rachel gasped. It was the first time Lily had initiated contact with anyone, human or animal. Frank's gaze dropped to Lily's wrist. When he saw the mark, his expression shifted, almost like recognition. "Well," he said softly, "the wolf has found her." Shadow came home that afternoon. Rachel had her doubts. His price was strangely low, his paperwork vague, but something in her daughter's eyes told her this was the right move. And it was. At first. Within days, Lily began whispering to him. By the end of the first week, she was speaking full sentences, but only to Shadow. She laughed for the first time in months. She played. She drew pictures, always of a black wolf and a little girl, with stars above their heads. But the pup grew. Fast. Faster than any dog Rachel had ever treated. At 4 months, Shadow weighed 60 pounds. By 6 months, he was taller than Lily. His eyes glinted with an intelligence that unsettled Rachel. His reactions were too fast, his behavior too measured. Not a husky. Not entirely. Still, he was gentle. Always with Lily. Protective, even. One night, a neighbor's dog wandered too close to their yard. Shadow didn't bark. He stood still, muscles coiled, eyes tracking the intruder. Only when Lily walked outside and touched his flank did he relax. "You ever seen a dog like that?" Rachel asked her friend and fellow vet, Dr. Mason. "No," he replied. "I don't think that's a dog at all." Then came the whispers in town. "Did you hear about Rachel Carter's wolf? They let that thing sleep next to a kid." The hunters who appeared near the woods that morning weren't poachers. They were neighbors. Scared ones. And now they were staring down a child with fire in her eyes and a creature that refused to flinch. One of them lowered his gun. "She's got it under control," he muttered. The others hesitated. Then, one by one, they stepped back. Rachel reached Lily seconds later, dropping to her knees and wrapping her arms around her daughter. "What were you thinking?" Lily leaned into her mother's arms for the first time in months. "He was scared," she whispered. "I had to help." Rachel looked past her daughter to the black creature behind the fence. Shadow's amber eyes met hers, and for the first time, Rachel understood. He wasn't just a therapy animal. Or even a pet. He was something else entirely. And this was only the beginning. Shadow's growth was nothing short of extraordinary. Within months, he had outpaced the size of any domestic dog Rachel had ever encountered. His once puppy-like demeanor evolved into something more profound, exhibiting an intelligence that bordered on the uncanny. Lily, too, underwent a transformation. Her previously limited interactions blossomed into full conversations, but only with Shadow. The bond between them was palpable, a silent understanding that needed no words. Concerned about Shadow's rapid development and the whispers circulating in Pine Grove, Rachel decided it was time for answers. She scheduled an appointment with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a renowned wildlife geneticist at the University of Montana. During the examination, Dr. Vasquez meticulously collected samples from Shadow, her brow furrowing with each observation. "He's exhibiting characteristics uncommon in domestic breeds," she noted, her voice tinged with curiosity. "We'll need to run comprehensive DNA analyses." Days turned into an agonizing week before the results arrived. Rachel sat across from Dr. Vasquez, the sterile scent of the clinic amplifying her anxiety. "Rachel," Dr. Vasquez began, her tone measured, "Shadow's DNA results are unexpected. He possesses approximately 87% Northwestern Wolf DNA, 9% Siberian Husky, and the remaining percentage is an undetermined hybridization." Rachel's heart sank. "What does this mean for us?" Dr. Vasquez sighed, removing her glasses. "In Montana, owning a high-percentage wolf hybrid is legal, but there are stringent regulations. Animals with 50% or higher wolf content must have permanent identification and adhere to specific containment standards. Given Shadow's genetic makeup, he qualifies as a high-content wolf dog." The weight of the revelation pressed heavily on Rachel. The law was clear, and the safety of both Lily and the community was paramount. Reluctantly, she made the heart-wrenching decision to relocate Shadow to Wild Haven Reserve, a sanctuary specializing in wolf hybrids. The day of the separation was overcast, mirroring the somber mood. Lily clung to Shadow, her tears soaking into his thick fur. "You promised we'd never be apart," she cried, her voice breaking. Shadow nuzzled her gently, his amber eyes reflecting a sorrow that words couldn't capture. Margaret Ellis, the founder of Wild Haven, observed the exchange with a heavy heart. "We'll take good care of him, Lily," she assured, though her words offered little comfort. As the gates of Wild Haven closed behind Shadow, Lily's world dimmed. The vibrant colors of her drawings faded. Her laughter silenced. Rachel watched helplessly as her daughter retreated into a shell thicker than before. At Wild Haven, Shadow's transformation was equally profound. He refused food, his once luminous coat losing its sheen. Margaret and her team tried various methods to engage him, but his spirit seemed tethered to the little girl he had left behind in Pine Grove. The community buzzed with mixed reactions. Some praised Rachel's responsible decision, while others whispered about the mystical connection between Lily and Shadow. The legend of the wolf-marked children resurfaced, tales of children born with wolf-like birthmarks, destined to bond with the wild. One evening, as Rachel closed the clinic, Frank Weston appeared at her door, his rugged demeanor softened by a look of genuine concern. "I heard about Shadow," he began, removing his hat. "There's something you should know." Rachel gestured for him to sit, her curiosity piqued. "I'm listening." Frank took a deep breath. "Years ago, I was part of a project, Bridge Wolf. We aimed to preserve wolf genetics by integrating them with domestic breeds. Shadow is one of those rare hybrids." Rachel's eyes widened. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I didn't think it mattered," Frank admitted, guilt evident in his tone. "But seeing the bond between Lily and Shadow, it's unlike anything I've ever witnessed." The revelation added another layer to the intricate tapestry of Lily and Shadow's connection. It wasn't merely companionship, it was destiny, intertwined with genetics and ancient lore. Determined to help her daughter, Rachel sought the counsel of Joseph Greyfeather, a respected elder of the local indigenous community. He listened intently as Rachel recounted the events, his expression thoughtful. "The mark your daughter bears," he said slowly, "is known among our people as the wolf's embrace. It's a sign of a profound bond between human and wolf, a relationship that transcends the physical realm." Rachel's skepticism wavered in the face of Joseph's conviction. "What should I do?" "Trust," Joseph advised. "Trust in their connection. Sometimes, the answers lie not in science, but in the spaces between, where spirit and nature converge." Armed with this newfound perspective, Rachel resolved to find a way to reunite Lily and Shadow, believing that their bond held the key to healing for both her daughter and the heartbroken Wolfdog. The air at Wild Haven was cooler than Pine Grove, crisp and dry, with the scent of pine and earth lingering on every breeze. But for Shadow, it might as well have been airless. Since arriving at the sanctuary, he hadn't eaten a full meal. He paced the perimeter of his enclosure with mechanical regularity, occasionally sitting by the fence where he could catch glimpses of the road. Waiting. Always waiting. Margaret Ellis stood beside Dr. Logan Pierce, the sanctuary's head biologist, watching the wolf dog from a distance. "He's shutting down," Margaret murmured. "He's grieving," Logan adjusted his glasses, concern etched across his face. "He's not like the others. His responses are more conscious. I've never seen a hybrid react to separation this way." Meanwhile, back in Pine Grove, Lily had slipped back into the silence that once defined her world. She no longer reached for her picture books. Her once colorful crayon sketches turned into jagged, chaotic scribbles, if she picked up crayons at all. She barely ate. Barely slept. Rachel could only watch as her daughter drifted into emotional exile. One night, Rachel found Lily curled up on the floor of her room, whispering something. At first, she thought it was gibberish, but when she leaned in, she recognized the words. "Shadow. Wait for me." That was the final straw. The next morning, Rachel packed a small bag and drove Lily to Wild Haven, desperate and uncertain. Margaret met them at the entrance, her expression unreadable. "We don't normally allow outside visitors into private enclosures," she said, then paused. "But this isn't a normal situation." Shadow was lying under a tree when Lily approached, flanked by Rachel and 2 staff members. He didn't lift his head at first, but the moment Lily stepped forward and whispered his name. "Shadow." His ears twitched. Then he rose. The transformation was immediate and astonishing. The wolf dog's entire posture changed. He walked, not ran, up to the fence, eyes locked on the little girl he thought he had lost. Without hesitation, Lily placed her palm against the wire mesh. Shadow gently pressed his forehead to it. For a long time, they just stood like that, connected by silence and steel. "God," Margaret whispered, hand over her mouth. Rachel's knees buckled, and she sank to the bench behind her. "I didn't think he'd remember her like that." Logan stared, barely blinking. "This isn't just recognition. This is attunement." In the following days, Margaret made an unorthodox decision: allow Lily to become a junior volunteer, under full supervision. She could spend structured time with Shadow, help feed him through safe gates, observe his behaviors, and even participate in enrichment activities. Rachel hesitated at first, but Joseph Greyfeather, who had stayed in contact, offered his quiet counsel. Let the bond teach her. It may do more than any therapy ever could. And so began a remarkable new chapter. Lily visited every day after school. She would sit outside the enclosure with a sketch pad, noting Shadow's movements, drawing him in varying states of rest, play, and alertness. Over time, she developed her own shorthand, strange symbols and arrows pointing to ears, tails, paws. Margaret and Logan noticed something else. Shadow responded to Lily's hand signals in ways he didn't to anyone else. A wave meant sit. A tap to the knee, stay. A curled finger meant roll. At first, they thought it coincidence. Then Logan set up a video experiment. Lily entered the observation pen and used a series of gestures. Shadow obeyed each one with near-military precision. "How did you teach him that?" Logan asked afterward, bewildered. "I didn't," Lily said softly. "We just understand." The footage stunned even the most seasoned staff. Margaret sent it anonymously to a colleague at Stanford. The reply was immediate. "This level of nonverbal communication is unheard of outside of primate studies. Are you sure that's a wolf hybrid?" In town, word began to spread. Some called it a miracle. Others whispered of danger. At a local town meeting, resident Henry Weller stood and declared, "That girl is controlling a wild animal with hand signs. That's not natural, that's possession or something." But Sheriff David Monroe, who had visited the sanctuary himself, stood up and said, "I saw the two of them together. And I'll tell you what's unnatural, how that animal becomes a lamb in her presence. If anything, she's calming him, not provoking him." The divide grew, but so did the intrigue. Meanwhile, Logan began running genetic simulations based on the earlier DNA results. What he found disturbed and fascinated him. There was a unique marker in Shadow sequencing, one he'd never seen before. When cross-referenced with Lily's blood work from old pediatric reports Rachel provided, something peculiar emerged. A mirrored sequence. A shared mutation. A bridge. Logan called Margaret into the lab. "I think we're looking at more than just a bond. This may be genetic resonance, something passed down across species." Rachel said, "Lily was born with a wolf paw-shaped birthmark." Margaret nodded slowly. "This isn't just rare," Logan said. "This is unheard of." But something else was changing, subtle signs in Shadow's behavior. He was sleeping more. Eating slower. Lily, too, had started complaining of leg pains, occasional headaches. Rachel chalked it up to stress, but her instincts were on high alert. And then, one evening, Lily fell asleep on the car ride home from Wild Haven. Rachel noticed her daughter's wrist twitching, as if reaching for something in her dreams, and she whispered a single word in her sleep. "Blood." What neither of them knew was that the connection they shared had only just begun to reveal its full depth. The summer sun had begun to lose its edge, retreating earlier each evening, as if the sky itself sensed a coming shift. At Wild Haven, the leaves flirted with golden tones, and the forest exhaled that unmistakable scent of change. But inside the sanctuary's medical wing, the air was sterile. Quiet. Far removed from the crisp wilderness outside. Shadow lay on the padded floor of the examination room, unusually still. His breaths were shallow, measured, as if conserving energy. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood beside a small ultrasound monitor, her gloved hands trembling slightly. Margaret Ellis hovered behind her, arms crossed tightly. "You're sure?" Margaret asked. Dr. Vasquez didn't answer at first. She froze the image on the screen, pointing to a faint shadow on the Wolfdog's spleen. "There's a mass," she said quietly. "It wasn't there 2 months ago." Margaret's stomach turned. "Cancer. Hemangiosarcoma. Aggressive. Internal bleeding could begin at any time." Vasquez sighed. "We'll do a biopsy to confirm, but we need to prepare ourselves." When Rachel Carter received the call, she was in the kitchen, watching Lily quietly sketch at the table. The little girl hadn't said much all day, her usual questions: "Can we go see Shadow early? Did he eat today?" had stopped without explanation. Rachel knew something was wrong, but she didn't expect the phone call to come with news that would knock the air from her lungs. "He's sick," Rachel whispered, sitting across from Lily. "The doctors found something inside Shadow. They think it might be cancer." Lily didn't react at first. She stared at her drawing, a detailed sketch of Shadow lying under a tree, and then looked up. "I know," she said simply. Rachel blinked. "What do you mean, you know?" "I feel it. His blood. It's wrong. It's tired." Later that week, during a routine pediatric checkup, Rachel mentioned Lily's increasing fatigue and sudden loss of appetite. The pediatrician ordered blood work, just to be safe. 3 days later, Rachel sat frozen in a hospital corridor as a hematologist explained the impossible. "Your daughter has acute myeloid leukemia," the doctor said gently. "It's rare and aggressive, but we caught it early." "No," Rachel murmured. "No, this isn't real." But it was. Within the span of a week, both Lily and Shadow had been diagnosed with deadly blood diseases. The parallel was chilling. What were the odds? Margaret called an emergency meeting at Wild Haven. Rachel, Logan Pierce, Dr. Vasquez, and Joseph Greyfeather gathered in the main lodge. "I don't believe in coincidences," Margaret began. "And neither does science, not when two beings this bonded, this genetically unique, get sick at the exact same time." "I've been running simulations," Logan said, opening his laptop. "Lily and Shadow share a mutation, a rare genetic variant I've never seen. It's not just similar, it's nearly identical in function and location. I'm calling it the bridge gene." Rachel leaned forward. "You're saying it's real? This thing Joseph talked about, it actually exists?" Joseph nodded solemnly. "Our people have known of it for centuries. Children marked by wolves, born with the pawprint. They're the chosen ones. They walk between our world and the wild." He gestured to Lily's wrist. "That mark, it's not random. It's ancestral memory made flesh." Everyone turned toward Frank Weston, who had been uncharacteristically quiet in the corner. The old man finally spoke, his voice gravelly. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "I knew what Shadow was the day I saw Lily's birthmark. I knew she was one of them." "One of what?" Rachel snapped. "Bridge children. Shadow came from a bloodline protected for generations by a group I was part of. We called ourselves the Wardens of the Line. Our job was to preserve the bridge wolves, those capable of bonding with humans who shared their marker." "Why didn't you say anything?" Rachel demanded. "Because we were being hunted," Frank replied. "For decades, private collectors, geneticists with more money than ethics, they tried to track these wolves. If anyone knew Shadow had been placed with a marked child," he trailed off. Logan stood up abruptly. "There's a treatment protocol. It's radical. Experimental. But it might give them both a chance." Everyone turned to him. "Stem cell transplant. Cross species." He took a breath. We take Shadow's bone marrow and try to transplant it into Lily. And maybe vice versa. Their gene alignment, this bridge gene, might allow the body to accept the transplant without full rejection. Rachel's mouth opened in disbelief. Logan, that's never been done. You're talking about a wolf donating stem cells to a human child. Logan nodded. I know. It's insane. But right now, it's our best shot. Joseph stepped forward. There is another step. Everyone looked at him. There is a ceremony. Old. Sacred. Before the healing can happen, the bond must be acknowledged by the spirits of both worlds. He looked at Rachel. If you want to proceed with science, you must also accept the mystery. Rachel didn't hesitate. She reached across the table and took Lily's sketchbook. She flipped to a page, one Rachel hadn't noticed before. It showed Lily and Shadow standing under a full moon. Between them was a glowing thread, like light, or blood, running from his heart to hers. They already know, Rachel said. They've known all along. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees surrounding Wild Haven. Somewhere in the deeper part of the sanctuary, Shadow lifted his head and turned toward the cabin where Lily now lay asleep. The bond had been formed in silence. Now, it would be tested in blood. The night before the transplant, the sky over Pine Grove was painted in deep indigo, pierced by 1,000 trembling stars. At the heart of Wild Haven Reserve, a sacred fire crackled quietly within a ring of ancient stones. The ceremony was simple. No chanting. No spectacle. Just silence, smoke, and a circle of those who understood the weight of what was to come. Lily sat wrapped in a woven blanket, her small frame pale and fragile beneath it. Shadow lay beside her, his massive head resting gently across her legs. Joseph Greyfeather knelt across from them, his voice low and steady as he placed a carved wooden bowl between them. The herbs inside glowed faintly in the firelight. This is not magic, Joseph said softly. This is memory. The kind passed down in blood and bone. He reached forward, dipping his fingers into the smoke, then pressed them gently to Lily's marked wrist and the center of Shadow's broad chest. Two spirits. One thread, he whispered. Walk this path together. Heal, if it is the will of the old ones. Lily didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand slid into Shadow's thick fur, and the Wolfdog gave a low, soft exhale, as if answering in his own language. The following morning, Wild Haven was quieter than it had ever been. The medical team, a mix of pediatric specialists and veterinary experts, had transformed the lodge's research wing into a double surgical suite. State-of-the-art human equipment stood beside modified veterinary gear. It was a union of disciplines that had never been joined before. It was either brilliant science, or madness. Dr. Logan Pierce stood at the center of it all, directing the synchronized procedures with unwavering focus. To either side of the partitioned room, Lily and Shadow lay sedated, their vitals monitored in real time. Rachel and Joseph waited just beyond the sterile glass, eyes fixed on the blinking monitors. As the hours ticked by, the team carefully harvested bone marrow from Shadow, extracting stem cells filtered for genetic compatibility with Lily's unique immune profile. From Lily, the process was reversed, a small amount of her marrow was prepared to return to Shadow, his system weakened but still responsive. What no one dared say aloud was the truth they all carried: if the transplants failed, both could die. The night passed slowly. Rachel barely moved from the glass, her eyes locked on Lily's face. Margaret sat beside her, a comforting hand never leaving her shoulder. Joseph murmured quiet prayers under his breath. And then, signs of change. Lily's white blood cell count, which had plummeted for weeks, began to climb. Slowly. Steadily. Her temperature stabilized. She stirred in her sleep. Across the room, Shadow's respiration deepened. His coat, once dull and patchy from treatment, seemed to catch the light again. 2 days later, Lily opened her eyes. Her first words were not to her mother or the doctors, but to the empty air. "He's awake." Moments later, Shadow's eyelids fluttered. His nose twitched. And when he was wheeled into the adjacent recovery pen, he lifted his head toward the glass separating him from Lily, and gave a quiet, unmistakable whine. Over the following months, recovery was slow but remarkable. Lily endured round after round of supportive therapy, her strength returning in fits and starts. But every time her motivation faltered, a visit from Shadow reignited her spirit. Sometimes, she didn't speak, just sat beside his pen, sketching silently while he watched her with eyes that seemed older than time. Eventually, both were cleared for limited movement. With careful supervision, they resumed short walks around the sanctuary's private trails, first separately, then together. The first time Lily stepped into Shadow's enclosure, he approached her slowly, sniffed her wrist, and pressed his muzzle gently to the mark beneath her sleeve. "You remembered," she whispered. By spring, Lily was running again, her laughter echoing through the pines like birdsong. Shadow, while graying at the muzzle, had regained nearly all his mobility and energy. He often sat outside the educational pavilion where Lily now helped guide young visitors through their first encounters with the sanctuary's animals. Margaret had established the Bridge program in Lily's name, a new branch of Wild Haven focused on therapeutic experiences for children with autism, PTSD, and emotional trauma. Lily, barely 7 years old, became its youngest ambassador. Frank Weston, now officially a consultant for Wild Haven, worked quietly behind the scenes, cataloging genetic lineages, overseeing ethical protocols, and ensuring that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. Joseph remained close, teaching Lily not just about biology, but about heritage. About the legends and truths that live side by side in places like Wild Haven. And then, there was the wolf pup. The smallest of Shadow's offspring, born unexpectedly in the months after his procedure, was different. While her siblings roughhoused and tested boundaries, this one watched Lily from afar, ears twitching at every sound she made. It took weeks before she approached, but when she did, she placed a paw on Lily's lap, mirroring the exact gesture Shadow had made years before. "She knows," Lily said softly. "She remembers the thread." The pup was named Ember. The first time Lily heard the voices, she thought it was the wind. It was late August, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, when she woke to a sound like distant singing, faint, mournful, threading through the trees outside her window. Shadow, who usually slept curled at the foot of her bed, was gone. She pressed her palm to the glass, her birthmark tingling. "Come." The word wasn't spoken aloud. It pulled, like a hook behind her ribs. She slipped outside, barefoot, the dew-soaked grass cool under her feet. The forest was alive in a way she'd never seen, not with animals, but with light. Tiny blue embers flickered between the trees, swirling like fireflies, but slower. Deliberate. Shadow stood at the tree line, his amber eyes reflecting the strange glow. When he saw her, his ears pricked forward. "You hear them too," his gaze seemed to say. Then the howling began. Not from Shadow. Not from any wolf she could see. This was deeper, older, a sound that vibrated in her bones. The blue lights pulsed in time, clustering around a single ancient oak at the edge of Wild Haven's boundary. Carved into the bark was a symbol, a wolf's paw, identical to the mark on her wrist. Shadow's muzzle lifted. His chest rumbled, not a growl, but a response. Lily reached for him, her fingers sinking into his fur. The moment she touched him, the world shifted. Suddenly, she wasn't just Lily anymore. She was running, for legs, not two, through a forest that smelled of snow and iron. She was hungry. She was hunted. She was Lily. Rachel's voice shattered the vision. Lily gasped, stumbling back. The lights vanished. The howling stopped. Shadow whined, nudging her hand. Rachel sprinted across the yard, her face pale in the moonlight. What are you doing out here? Lily opened her mouth, but the words tangled in her throat. How could she explain what she didn't understand? I heard them, she whispered finally. The wolves. Rachel's grip tightened on her shoulders. There are no wolves here, sweetheart. Just shadow. But Lily knew what she'd felt. And when she looked back at the tree, the carved paw was gone. Frank Weston knew more than he'd told them. Lily realized it the next morning when he arrived at Wild Haven with a rusted metal box tucked under his arm. His hands shook as he placed it on Margaret's desk. You said the bridge gene was unique, he said to Logan. But it's not. It's been documented before. Inside the box were yellowed photographs, a journal, and a single vial of blackened blood. The photos showed a boy, no older than Lily, with a wolfdog twice his size. The same amber eyes as Shadow. The same knowing tilt of the head. Scrawled on the back of one photo, Elias and Fenrir, 1947. Trial number 12. Success. Logan's breath caught. Who were they? Frank's voice dropped. The first pair. The ones who proved the bond could transfer life. He tapped the vial. Fenrir's blood saved Elias from polio. But the cost? He trailed off, glancing at Lily. What cost? Rachel demanded. Frank hesitated. The wolf died 3 days later. A chill slithered down Lily's spine. Shadow, who'd been dozing in the corner, lifted his head abruptly, as if he'd heard. Margaret flipped through the journal, her frown deepening. This says the bond goes both ways. If the human gets the wolf's strength, the wolf gets the human's. She paled. Mortality. Silence. Lily's stomach lurched. She thought of Shadow's cancer. Of her own sudden illness. We're connected. Not just in life. In death too. Shadow padded to her side, pressing his flank against her leg. She buried her fingers in his fur, her throat tight. No, she said fiercely. I won't let it take him. Frank's gaze was grim. It might not be your choice. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and for a moment, Lily swore she heard that same mournful howl. Joseph Greyfeather was waiting for them at the ancient oak. He knelt beside the trunk, his palm flat against the bark where Lily had seen the carving. Now, in daylight, the tree looked ordinary. You saw the ayah, he said without looking up. The spirit lights. Lily nodded. They called to me. Joseph's dark eyes met hers. They weren't calling you, Lily. They were calling him. He nodded to Shadow. And now that he's answered, the old magic is waking. Rachel crossed her arms. What does that mean? It means the bond is deepening. And the more it does, the less human Lily becomes. He turned Lily's wrist over, tracing the birthmark. This isn't just a mark. It's a claim. The wild knows its own. Lily thought of the vision, the feeling of running on 4 legs, the scent of snow. Had that been Shadow's memory? Joseph placed a hand on the tree. This is a threshold. The place where our world and the wolf's world meet. And soon, you'll have to choose. Choose what? Lily whispered. Joseph's voice was soft. Which side to walk on? Shadow let out a low whine, his ears flattening. Lily pressed her forehead to his. I choose you, she thought. Always. Above them, the leaves rustled, though there was no wind. That night, the dreams came again. This time, Lily didn't just see through Shadow's eyes, she was him. She smelled the fierce sweat of the hunters who'd shot at him as a pup. Felt the ache of the chain that had once bound him. Knew the exact moment he'd caught her scent for the first time, sweet, bright, like honey and home. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears. Shadow was gone again. She found him at the threshold tree, his body rigid, staring into the dark. The blue lights, the Aya, swirled around him, brighter now. And this time, Lily heard the words in the howling. Come home. Shadow's muzzle lifted. His chest vibrated with a sound that wasn't quite a howl, more like a reply. Lily grabbed his fur. No. You can't go. He turned to her, his eyes glowing in the dark. For a heartbeat, she saw something in them she'd never seen before, longing. Then he licked her cheek, gentle, resigned, and stepped into the tree. Not around it. Through it. The bark rippled like water. The blue lights flared. And then. He was gone. Lily's scream tore through the night. Rachel and Margaret found Lily clawing at the tree, her fingers bleeding, her voice raw. He went in, she sobbed. The tree took him. Rachel pulled her back, but Joseph stopped them. Wait. He pressed his ear to the bark. A slow smile spread across his face. He's calling you. Lily froze. What? Joseph placed her palm against the tree. Listen. And then she heard it, faint, but unmistakable. A single, echoing howl. Shadow. Lily didn't hesitate. She stepped forward. And the world split open. Trees towered like giants, their trunks threaded with veins of blue light. The air hummed with a sound like 1,000 distant heartbeats. And the sky. Lily gasped. Above her, the stars weren't stars at all. They were eyes. Glowing, shifting, watching. Shadow stood a few feet away, his fur shimmering with the same blue fire as the lights. When he saw her, his tail wagged once, then he turned and loped into the trees. Follow. She ran after him, the ground soft as moss under her feet. Strange scents flooded her nose, ozone, wet stone, something sweet and metallic. Then the path ended at a cliff. Below stretched a valley, and in its center, a massive stone archway, covered in carvings of wolves and children. Shadow sat at the cliff's edge, his gaze fixed on the arch. Lily knelt beside him. What is this place? A voice answered, but not Shadow's. The first bridge. Lily spun. A woman stood behind them, her hair white as birch bark, her eyes the same gold as Shadow's. And you, she said, smiling, are the first in 100 years to walk it. The white-haired woman's fingers were cold as bone when she touched Lily's birthmark. Up close, her eyes weren't just gold, they pulsed, like embers breathing. You smell of iron and medicine, she murmured. The human world has tried to cut your thread. Shadow growled low in his throat, positioning himself between Lily and the woman. Hush, little bridge, the woman chided. You brought her here. Do you regret it already? Lily's pulse hammered. Who are you? The woman smiled, revealing teeth too sharp to be human. I am Ayana. The last keeper of the crossing. She gestured to the stone arch below. And that is where your wolf must go if he wishes to live. A gust of wind carried the scent of snow and blood from the valley. Lily's birthmark burned. Why? Ayana's face darkened. Because the bond you share is a knife cutting both ways. His strength heals your body, but your mortality poisons his spirit. The arch will sever the tie before it kills him. Lily recoiled. No. I won't lose him. Then you choose his death. Shadow whined, pressing his muzzle into Lily's palm. His fur was thinner now, the blue fire flickering unevenly under his skin. Ayana sighed. Come. The ancestors will explain. She turned and walked toward a narrow path leading down the cliff. Shadow nudged Lily forward. The moment Lily's foot touched the path, the world rippled. Suddenly, she stood in a circle of towering stones. 12 figures waited inside, some human, some wolf, some caught between. At the center stood a boy with Shadow's amber eyes. Elias. Elias's grin was wild, his teeth slightly pointed. "Took you long enough," he said. His voice echoed strangely, as if two people spoke at once. Lily's breath fogged in a suddenly frigid air. "You're dead." "Mostly." He winked. "But Fenrir and we're still here." He tapped his chest, where a wolf-shaped shadow moved beneath his skin. Ayana stepped forward. "Show her." Elias sighed. When he rolled up his sleeve, Lily gasped. A wolf's paw, just like hers, but blackened, the edges fraying like burnt paper. "The mark fades when the bond breaks," he said. "But Fenrir and we found another way." One of the shadowed figures stepped into the light, a man with silver scars raking his face. "A dangerous way," he rumbled. "We became neither human nor wolf, but something in between. Cursed to walk both worlds, never fully belonging to either." Lily's knees trembled. Shadow leaned against her, his warmth the only real thing in this ghostly place. "There has to be another choice," she whispered. Ayana crouched before her. "There is one. But the price is higher." Behind her, the stone arch began to glow. Chapter 15, The Third Path. The arch's light revealed carvings Lily hadn't seen before, a child and wolf standing together under a bleeding moon. "The first bridge was made by those who refused to choose," Ayana said. "They wove their souls together so tightly that not even death could untangle them." Elias's grin faded. "It's how Fenrir and I survived. But now we're stuck. Can't go forward, can't go back." Lily touched the carving. The stone was warm. "How do I do it?" A murmur ran through the ancestors. Ayana studied her. "You would truly bind your soul to his? Even if it means giving up your human life? Your family?" Lily thought of Rachel's laughter, of the way her mother's hands always smelled like antiseptic and peppermint gum. Her throat tightened. Then she looked at Shadow. His eyes held galaxies. "Yes." Ayana nodded. "Then you must walk the bridge, together. But know this, if your hearts are not perfectly aligned, the crossing will tear you both apart." Shadow let out a soft whine, licking Lily's wrist where the mark pulsed. Elias stepped forward. "I'll go with you. Partway." Ayana raised her hands. The arch's glow intensified. "Then begin." The bridge wasn't stone. It was memory. With each step, Lily saw flashes, Shadow's first hunt, her own birth, 1,000 moments stretching backward and forward like a river. Elias walked beside them, his form flickering between boy and wolf. "The bond is strongest here," he said. "But so is the pain." Ahead, the arch's keystone gleamed with a red light. The bleeding moon from the carving. Shadow's pace slowed. His breath came in ragged gasps. "He's fighting it," Elias muttered. "The human part of him that loves you is trying to turn back. To save you from the choice." Lily knelt, pressing her forehead to Shadow's. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not afraid." A howl echoed through the void, not Shadow's, not Elias's. Rachel's voice. Lily's head snapped up. Back through the bridge, in the human world, she saw her mother crumpled at the base of the threshold tree, screaming her name. Ayana's warning rang in her ears, "You must choose." Shadow whimpered. Lily closed her eyes. And pushed him toward the moon. The scream that tore from Lily's throat wasn't human. It was the sound of a bond breaking. Shadow's body convulsed as the red light engulfed him. For one terrible second, Lily saw through him, saw the wolf he'd been before they met, saw the man he might have been in another life. Then the light vanished. Shadow stood before her, whole, healed, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian. But his eyes. They were human. Elias gasped. You didn't bind him. You set him free." Lily's birthmark burned like a brand. When she looked down, the edges were blackening, just like Elias's. Ayanna appeared, her face unreadable. You gave him your humanity instead of taking his wildness. Now he walks as both. And you. She touched Lily's cheek. You will fade. Beyond the bridge, Rachel's cries grew fainter. The human world was slipping away. Shadow, no, not just Shadow anymore, knelt before her, his now human hands trembling as he cupped her face. His voice, when he spoke, was rough with disuse. Take it back. Lily smiled. I can't. The ancestors began to howl. Rachel Carter's hands bled as she clawed at the tree bark. Lily. Her voice was raw, her nails splintered. The forest around her had gone eerily silent, no birds, no wind, even the distant hum of Wild Haven's generators had vanished. Margaret gripped her shoulders. Rachel, stop. You're hurting yourself. She's in there. Rachel sobbed. I heard her. Then the tree moved. Not a rustle. Not a bend. The trunk shuddered, like something trapped inside was fighting to get out. A low, mournful howl vibrated through the roots, up through Rachel's bones. Joseph Greyfeather went very still. The bridge is closing, he whispered. If she doesn't cross back now, she never will. In the spirit world, Lily's fingers were turning translucent. Shadow, no, he had a name now, a real name, the one buried in his soul, Kale, gripped her wrists. His new human hands were warm, but his eyes were still wolf gold, still his. You're disappearing, he growled. Lily tried to smile. It's okay. You're safe now. The ancestors circled them, their forms flickering between human and wolf. Elias stepped forward, Fenrir's growl underscoring his words. There's another way. But you won't like it. Ayanna hissed. The pact is forbidden. So was the bridge gene, Elias shot back. He turned to Lily. The bond isn't broken, it's unbalanced. You gave Kale your humanity. But he can give something back. Kale's grip tightened. Anything. Elias's grin was sharp. Your voice. Back in the human world, Rachel collapsed against the tree, her tears soaking the roots. Then. A sound. Not a howl. Not a cry. A word. Mom. The bark split open with a sound like a thunderclap. Rachel screamed as Lily fell into her arms, solid, real, alive, with Shadow, Kale, his name was Kale now, lunging after her. But something was wrong. Lily gasped, clutching her throat. When she opened her mouth to speak, nothing came out. Shadow, Kale, nuzzled her cheek, his own voice gone silent again. Joseph let out a shuddering breath. A trade. Margaret stared. What? Her voice for his humanity, Joseph whispered. Now neither is fully human, or fully wolf. But they're together. Rachel cradled Lily's face. Baby, can you? Lily touched her own lips, then Kale's. Then she smiled, really smiled, and pressed her palm to her mother's chest, right over her heart. I'm here. And for the first time in her life, Rachel heard her. 1 year later, the threshold tree bloomed out of season. White flowers curled around its bark, their petals shaped like wolf paws. Visitors to Wild Haven left ribbons tied to its branches, prayers for lost pets, for sick children, for impossible bonds. Lily, still voiceless, still radiant, sat beneath it, her sketchbook open. Kale lounged beside her, his head in her lap, his two intelligent eyes tracking every visitor. Rachel knelt beside them, brushing a flower petal from Lily's hair. Dr. Vasquez called. Your latest scans are perfect. No trace of the leukemia. Lily signed rapidly, her hands flashing. Shadow too. Rachel laughed. Kale is annoyingly healthy. Though he still steals bacon off my plate. Kale yawned, unrepentant. In the distance, Ember, now nearly as large as Kale, bounded toward them with a stick. Lily grinned and threw it, her birthmark gleaming in the sun, no longer fading, but changed. Half wolf. Half human. Just like them. Joseph Greyfeather left an offering of tobacco at the tree's roots. The first bridge was broken, he murmured. But this one? This one will hold. And as the wind stirred the flowers, Lily could have sworn she heard it. A howl. An answer. A beginning. Epilogue, the marked ones. Some say if you stand under the threshold tree at dusk, you'll see them. A girl with stars in her hands. A wolf with a human soul. And the blue lights that dance between them, weaving a new kind of magic. A bridge. A bond. A promise. Always. The end.